Hey everyone, I am Jonathan at Quixel back again this week. Today I am back again with my colleague Jack McKelvie. We're going to be going over how to create a terrain path with Unreal Engine's blueprint system. In chat today, we also have my colleague Joseph Downer, who is now one of our technical artists at Quixel. He will be standing by in chat to answer any questions you might have of the technical variety. So, hey Jack, let's go get started, huh, buddy?
Yeah, let's do it. So what we'll be making here today is tracks like this. If I just go ahead and click on it, you can kind of see how I've laid this out. It's a spline blueprint. Many of you may have seen it, but this is what we're going to be making today. And to start, what we need to do is we need to make the base mesh. So I'm just going to hop over into Maya. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and create a plane. And for this, there's many different cases that you'll need to get measurements. For example, like real world roads, for example, usually they have some sort of metric that you can look up and find out how wide the road is. And in our case, it's just a simple path. And since I'm using a scale reference of a regular human being, I think about 1 meter by 1 meter will probably do the trick for something like this. And for paths like this, and using blueprints, you really need to have plenty of quads on your mesh, so you need to have plenty of cuts. I find that 8 by 8 is usually okay for something like this. Let's go ahead and get started though. I know what we're making, so we're making kind of a snow cut. So like through the center, it's going to be kind of compacted, and around the edges, there's going to be a fair amount of buildup from the snow that's been kicked over the edges. So just to kind of do that here, I'm probably going to do something like, let's see, let's do a few cuts here. All right. And I'm just going to pull this down a little bit. Usually it helps to have the outer edges a little bit lower than the rest of the mesh, because that's what's going to be intersecting with the terrain the most. And so it helps to make that transition a little bit more natural if it's sunk below the grid. Now let's go ahead and start pulling these guys up, because I know that's going to be the kind of mounds along the edges that I want. And I think these are just about perfect right here. Usually for something like this, I would either have the bottom here in the center a little bit raised off the ground, or maybe even just matching, because I don't really want this to be intersecting with the terrain. One thing you can do is, if you want this sunken down, you can paint the terrain and just kind of push the terrain down a little bit where you lay down your tracks, but that's a lot of additional work, and usually I'm a fan of trying to minimize additional work like that. So let's go ahead
A man
and
after my own heart.
yeah, I mean, it's all about efficiency. You don't want to be wasting time. If you don't have to, I mean, what's the point of doing a bunch of extra work, right? So right here, this is kind of looking a little bit pointy, so I'm gonna actually just bevel that a little bit. Maybe something like that, make it a bit rounded. It doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of this is, going to be taking this into the engine, doing our blueprint, and then finding out like, oh, this doesn't look quite right. Maybe I should change this. Being flexible like that is very important. So I'm just gonna make some more little tweaks here. The other thing you want to keep in mind is you really need to have some even topology here, because what we're actually going to do in Engine is we're going to tessellate this guy, and so we can have some displacement. So we want to make sure the topology is pretty even. I think something like that will probably be good. And let's go ahead and add our other subdivisions. 9's actually probably good for that. So now we have our base mesh here, and this is looking pretty good. We have our mounds at the edges, we have the sides digging into the terrain, and we have the base at an appropriate level. So next thing we're going to want to do is we need to UV this guy. And currently, one thing I want to note is this is on the x-axis, so it needs to tile horizontally. And let's go ahead and open up our UV editor to do that. And so for this, something like this, normally what I would do is I would just do a planar projection, and that would mostly do the trick. Alternatively, you can also unfold it and then basically fix it by straightening everything out. And what I do is I just lock it in there by holding. A lot of these are common hotkeys, but you can hold D to move your widget, and then X to snap it to a grid point, or V to snap it to a vertice. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scale this into place and get it like 90% of the way there. And then I'll just snap the vertices onto the grid line. And now what we have is this is actually going to tile horizontally and vertically, but the most important thing for me was to get it tiling horizontally. So if you ever run into a situation where it's like, hey, I don't want to tile it vertically, just horizontally, that's totally okay. You can do that. All right, and we have the object centered in the grid, so we're good there. And yeah, everything else looks good. So the only thing I'm going to do now is I'm just going to apply a default material that I have. And I'm just going to freeze the transforms and get rid of the history just in case. Then I'm going to export this guy to a folder.
So in the meantime, while you're working on that, Jack, we had a question from Jose Lopez. He wanted to know why you're adding so many subdivisions. I think I know the answer, but I want you to explain it.
Yeah, so the reason why I'm adding so many subdivisions on this is it's actually twofold. One thing you need is you need these subdivisions here because there's going to be a lot of bending that happens with the spline blueprint. So you need enough cuts here in order to be able to go around a corner or just make these nice smooth curves. Because if it's just, just your mesh, no cuts, no subdivisions, it's only going to bend when it has these meshes. So if I just like duplicate this over, this is going to be your bend point. And that's just not enough information in order to get a smooth result. The second reason that we're doing this is because in the material, what I actually did for this is I enabled tessellation. And when you do that, you really want even topology because it's just like traditional turbo smoothing, modeling, whatever. Basically, if you don't have even topology, it's going to turn out really poorly. So it's important that you have even topology. So if we come over...
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, I was going to say, too, that for those of you guys who aren't aware, when it comes to tessellation, which is kind of what I figured you were doing there, too, not just to get the roundness perfect, it also is very important that you do have enough subdivisions to support tessellation, because you cannot tessellate a single subdivided plane. Like if it's just a plane with one division, just a plane with literally two triangles, no engine out there that I'm aware of, like especially Unreal, is capable of subdividing that in real time to a point where the tessellation will look good. So one of the questions that we get quite frequently in our support venues is, why does my tessellation from Mixer not match what I'm seeing in Unreal? And that's because you don't have enough subdivisions in your model. as we like to say on polycount, if it doesn't look right, add more geo.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so now that we are actually in Unreal, let's go ahead and import our mesh real quick. So I have the content browser here, and I'm just going to import. I'm going to pull that to the side because I don't want to be showing this off. So when we import this, there's a couple things I like to do just for convenient purposes. I usually enable combined meshes because usually I don't want to import separate meshes. Let's see. There's one more thing I don't want to do. I don't want to import textures, and I don't want to create a material. All right, I think we're good. Just import all, and now we have our mesh. All right, there we go. Perfect. Now, briefly, I'm going to look into the material because this material is very simple. Where did that go? I must have accidentally closed it. All right, there we go. So this material is pretty simple overall. All I did is I grabbed a snow texture set from Bridge and brought that over, and it's using pretty standard material stuff. The only addition that I made is I added this displacement to the mesh because I wanted to have that. So all I'm doing here is I'm plugging my red channel from the displacement texture that I have into a multiply, and I'm multiplying that by a constant 1 vector. And that constant 1 vector is being divided by 2, and I'm subtracting this original texture from the divide, and I'm multiplying that against the vertex normal. And what that's doing is it's allowing to push and pull the vertices on the mesh evenly. So it's not going to just push, it's going to push and pull those vertices. And the vertex normal that I'm multiplying against, that's just going to make sure that it's not only multiplying in one direction. So it's not going to multiply in the z height. It's going to affect it based on the vertex normals. So wherever the vertex normals are pointing, that's where the displacement is going. I also added a dither temporal AA node. I really like this. It's we actually have some other stuff in the works that actually covers better blending methods, but for this tutorial I'm using the dither intersections, and I'm just multiplying the dither temporal AA by a constant 1 vector, and this is going to vary a lot depending on a lot of factors. Sometimes it can look pretty bad at high values if you're moving around, but if it's just a static shot, sometimes it looks perfect. You'll just have to mess around with those values in order to find something that you really like. The last thing I want to talk about is I also enabled subsurface scattering for this. So if you come over here to the shading model, you'll notice I have subsurface on, and then I also have a color value here. And that pretty much covers our material. It's not anything too spectacular, but let me go ahead and go into our static mesh and apply that real quick.
Look at this guy making materials like he owns the place.
Hey. So as you can see here, it looks a little funky in the static mesh window, but don't worry about that. It's going to look a lot better in the editor. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. All right, now to the meat of the stream. We're going to make a blueprint. And so if I just right click and create a blueprint class, we're going to actually make an actor. So let me just make BP winter tracks _1A. All right. Let's see if I can resize this properly. Okay. So if I just navigate over to the construction script, this is where we're going to be doing the meat of our construction, I guess. So basically with the construction script, as many of you probably already know, this will happen not at runtime, but actually just in editor. So you don't have to press play in order for it to happen. This happens, everything in the construction script happens in editor. So this is where we're going to be working. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a spline component. So up here under the add component, I'm just going to go ahead and search spline. Let's go and add it. All right, cool. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get a reference to the spline. Just make sure I have everything over here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so what we're going to do from here is we're going to get the number of spline points. There we go. And for the number of spline points, what that does is it actually defines the start and end point with multiple points in between those values. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do an integer. If you just subtract from that, you can actually find it pretty easily because it'll reference the original value. So it's integer minus integer. And what I want to do here is I want to subtract 2 from this. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually plug this into a for loop. If you have any technical questions, please feel free to ask. I'm not the most technical person, so you will receive support in chat for that. So I just wanted to make sure to point that out. And this is going to plug into our last index. Now what we want to do is we actually want to pull off this guy here and get our location and tangent from at spline point. There we go. Yeah, that's perfect. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this and reuse this for organization purposes. And we're going to leave this at local space. I'm going to duplicate this and plug the index back in there as well. And for this one, actually what we want to do is we want to add, so integer plus integer. And we're just going to add 1 to that. Point index, that's what we're looking for. There we go. All right, and so from here, what we need to do is we need to add a spline mesh component, and this is a very important node. There we go. So this is where we actually add all of our important stuff like the static mesh. So we can add the static mesh, we can adjust all of these different values, which is going to give us different shapes, different sizes, so you can resize it here if your mesh is too small or too large. The most important thing to note here is the forward axis. And since I made it on the x-axis, it's tiling on the x-axis, I want to leave it on x. But if you, for whatever reason, wanted to make it on the y-axis or z-axis, if you want to do that, you can change it right here, and so it will actually line up properly. We're going to come back to this node once we finish this blueprint, and then we can go over some of these values and some other stuff that I want to cover. So from here, what we are going to do is we actually need a reference to the default scene route for the target, or for the next part, apologies. So the next one is actually attached to component. That's what we need to do, is we need to actually attach this here. So that's actually the parent. And this, actually we don't need a target. All right. Next here, we're going to get the start. Yeah, set start. You might have to uncheck context sensitivity. Set start and end. That's what I was looking for. Okay. So coming back down to these get location and tangent at spline points, we're actually going to plug these in just in order. So start position, start tangent, end position, end tangent. All right. That looks pretty much good, I believe. So at this point, let's go ahead and look at the mesh component here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to come back over here to our content browser. Pull that up. And we're just going to drag and drop our static mesh in here. Just compile that. Oh, looks like we got an error. What do we have an error for? Oh, don't have a target. There we go. No, still an error.
Didn't they teach you that you can't shoot anything without a target, Jack?
There we go. Target. Hopefully. Okay. There we go. Okay. All better now. Okay. So at this point, all we really need to do is everything should be set up correctly. The only thing that I want to mention is shadows. With our material, we're using PDO or pixel depth offset, and I'm going to pull that over here. So this can make shadowing look really weird, and that's why it looks really awful right here. I don't really know why it looks so terrible, but for tracks and stuff like that, whenever you're using pixel depth offset, you're going to want to disable the shadows for that. Luckily, it's cheaper, but at the same time, you know, it still looks good. So if you just search cast, you're going to find cast shadow, and we're going to disable that. And that's going to make it look a lot better. And here in a minute, once I start placing it around, I'll actually show you all what it looks like, because it can look really gnarly. Let's go ahead and save that. Save that. I'm going to pull this over here. And now all we really need to do is we can start placing our winter tracks. So if I just look down here and place our winter tracks, there we have it. And it's actually facing the wrong direction, it looks like. So, oh no, looks like it is facing the right direction. Okay, cool. So it is facing the right direction. And once you place your winter tracks, you can move it around however you like. So all you have to do is just grab that little white square, and then you can start moving it around, right? And there's other controls as well. So this little red dot out here, if you grab that, that's actually going to change your rotation a little bit. Alternatively, you can also just rotate this, and it will basically do the same thing. When you click on this, hold Alt and drag, and that will allow you to extrude that mesh. So if I bring this down a little bit, you'll notice the pixel depth offset is doing a fairly good job of blending with the terrain. And if I pull that down, there we go. So now it almost starts resembling some tracks. Oh, there we go. So there we go. Okay, so now if I get down here, you can kind of see some of the downsides as well. If I move this off, as you move around, the illusion starts breaking a little bit with pixel depth offset. So you generally want to keep that value a little bit lower if you can. One thing I also wanted to show you real quick is if I open the blueprint and go back to cast shadow, it should be pretty easy to see how bad this is going to look. Yeah, so if you look at that now, it does not accept shadows correctly when you're using pixel depth offset. You can kind of adjust the PDO a little bit as well, and it doesn't work. If I drop it down to 20, 10, you get a lot of shadowing artifacts, and so it's really not worth it. So what I do is, like I said before, it's just go into the add. Yeah, there we go. Go into the add spline mesh component and make sure cast shadow is just disabled, and it will look a lot better. All right, Jonathan, do we have any questions about really anything?
What kind of question is that? We always have questions, Jack. Always have questions. Let's see. See if I can sort through all of this because there's so many of them. But here's a good one for you from Kajizan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, please forgive me. Are you going to cover interaction with this snow in any way? Or would you love to take on this challenge? Because this beauty at the moment is pretty much just static.
Yes, it is static. And, you know, that's an interesting question. I can't make any promises, obviously, but that is something that interests me a lot. One of the things I really loved about Uncharted 2 was when they first introduced that snow deformation. That was totally mind-blowing to me at the time, and just I loved it so much. And there are ways that we can do that, so we'll look into it.
I think you're good. So let's see what else you have in store for us.
No more questions? Well, this pretty much covers it, but I will go over just how I kind of laid out the scene just a little bit. So as you can see here, what I did is I just kind of created a basic terrain using some of the scans from the library. I just used a couple snow materials with a very basic terrain shader, tossed a few mountains in the background, and I added some fog. And then I just started placing these spline blueprints down. So if I go ahead and find my content browser, I think that's the one. So I just toss it down and kind of get a good level. That's all it really takes. You drag it out and start making some natural blueprint or natural tracks. And a lot of this also, what really helps is having some nice blending materials to go along with it. So it's nothing special. It's just textures that kind of go along with this style of snow. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does help the blending a little bit, because right now, as you can tell, it looks a little artificial. But what you can do is, let me sync this a little bit lower. There we go. What you can do is grab some like noisier snow and start adding that into the center and around the edges, and suddenly it starts looking a little bit more natural.
You know that do you remember that train that I made a couple years back?
I do, yeah.
I'm kicking myself right now for having painted all of that road work in there instead of just using a spline system.
Yeah, no, these spline systems make things really easy, because you can do this with tracks, you can do this with Roads, it's really nice. The only thing you have to be careful with is with these blueprints is you can stretch it out to a point where it's just way too stretched. So you do need to be cognizant of just the spacing of your spline points. But there's other things that you can do to mitigate that in the blueprint if you want. I typically just use it as is. One other thing I wanted to talk about also is just there's a lot of applications for this. One thing you can do is you can actually if you have a cliff that you make that's horizontally tiling, for example, you can do the same thing. You can lay out that cliff in a way that, like, if you wanted some cliffs over here and it's horizontally tiled, you can use this same blueprint and just drag that around, and suddenly you have an entire cliff face that tiles. And then you can toss in some additional rocks to break up some of the repetition. But that can be a real lifesaver just in terms of just saving time. Like, it saves a ton of time whenever I use it. Another thing that you can use it for is in my Blood Gulch scene, I actually went over this a little bit. My skirt here is actually made of the same blueprint. So if I just click that, you can see how I have those spline points all around here. And that's literally just adds a dust layer to transition from the bunker to the ground surface. And that helped a ton, just adding a little bit of, more realism to the scene. Let me come back over here. All right, I think that's pretty much all I had for the talk. I think we've covered just about everything.
No, we haven't.
No, we haven't? Oh.
You're not off the hook yet, sir.
Not yet?
No, we've been getting a ton of questions about the Skybox, and the only thing I want to talk about is why those cirrus clouds are moving at hurricane speeds.
A long time ago, I actually made this Skybox based on a Last of Us GDC talk, and it was really hard to make, but there's some interesting functionality here, and maybe we can actually do something in the future with it. I'll talk with Adnan about that. But basically what it's doing is it's flowing along the UVs and then just like reforming back in its original position. So as you can see, like, there's a slow fade here, and then it comes back here. There are some problems with it, like at poles you get this weird artifact. I added a nice fix for that somewhere. If I maybe 10,000.
This man's over here fixing UV distortions on poles and says he's not technical.
Yeah. Okay, fair point. I can't argue with that. This brush size, I cannot tell how big it is. Well, anyways, I added a functionality that will actually disable all this warping over here using vertex colors. But yeah, no, it's a nice effect that maybe we can cover in some upcoming stuff, because this is just super cheap, and it's nothing that fancy, because obviously it's one skybox and it tiles, and there's some artifacts that you can see sometimes, but it can be nice if you're doing something simple.
Oh, stop being so modest. Chad has been chattering about this for the past half hour.
Really?
It is one of the biggest talking points that I've been trying to avoid bringing up because I don't want to derail the conversation. But this is probably, to many people in chat, the most visually impressive part of the scenes, because it's not that the scene itself doesn't look great. It does. But with that sky, it just pulls it all together. And the way those clouds are racing is just incredible.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Now that I know there's some interest there, maybe I can do something in the future for you guys.
Oh, you're tantalizing them. Don't do that.
I don't know if I should. I don't know if I should show off because that does derail us a little bit.
Okay, okay. Maybe if we have some time at the end.
Okay, that works. So yeah, I know. I don't know. I mean, this is the end, so I guess I don't know. Maybe I'll show off the material real quick. I'll show off the
Yeah,
material and yeah.
we have a good 20 minutes left before we open up for questions. So yeah, let's do it.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. It has been a long time since I worked on this, so let's see. And blue clear. There we go. Okay. So let's explore this together because I'm looking at this for the first time in probably a year. What?
Before you go too in depth, let me tell you the comments that I'm getting right now.
Okay.
Epic B, damn, the sky looks really good. Zen Thorks, the tease is real. Abhishek Ga, yeah, incredible. Let's see. Yeah, Luke Hunter says, yes, please show us. Fernando says, oh, please teach us how to make this amazing skybox. And that's just, like, that's not even 10% of what we've gotten, dude. You got to show this off.
Okay, okay. I'll show it off. All right, so let's walk through this together a little bit. Okay, so vertex color. I'm appending the two vertex colors together in a constant bias scale. Let's see. So the wind direction here, I know what that does. That actually changes the direction. So if we take a moment to look at the skybox real quick, I can find the widget maybe. Is that it? I think that's it. So if I rotate this, you're going to get really weird artifacts because the direction is still going the same direction, right? And now what we can do is we can actually go into this and change the direction. So if, yeah, my Cirrus, ignore all that brightness. I change the wind direction to, say, green. It's suddenly gonna go that way. And I don't remember if there's a way. I think I found a way to do negative values here, but I don't quite remember how to do that. So let me just change it back here. Actually,
While you're working that out, Mustafa says, "Oh my God, that is one hell of a material."
there we go. Okay, so back to the material. There is some problems with it, which I tried to mitigate. Like, one of those problems was, oh, I can't change the wind direction, and I have to build my entire scene around it going one way, which is pretty unrealistic. That's like a huge restriction, so that's why I added this, which seems to work pretty well. So after the wind direction, I normalize it and transform it into tangent space from world space. That way, yeah, I believe that's what I had to do in order to get it working. And so it's only using the red and green channel, so it's basically the X and Y axis. And the distortion strength, this value, let's see what that does real quick. Because I'm pretty sure that just increases the intensity. I change it to 1. So, oh, okay, so yeah.
Oof.
So, let's see, 0.2, 0.3. Okay, so yeah, it's actually what that does is it actually increases the depth a lot. At least that's what I found, is it increases the depth and the speed towards the sides.
Jack, you know that? Have you ever like gone on a really strenuous walk or a run, and then you look up at the clouds, and then it feels like the clouds are moving away from you when they're really not?
Yeah.
That's totally that effect right there, and it is freaking me out.
Yeah, no, I feel you. That is something I have experienced, and it does look a lot like it. It's almost like It's almost combined with a bit of lightheadedness almost or something. I
Yeah,
don't
it's
know.
giving me PTSD flashbacks to being like nauseated. I'm gonna stop looking.
Okay, so and over here we have a time and wind strength. So the wind strength, I believe, actually controls the speed. So if I change that to like 1, so yeah, that's gonna be like super rapid. And then 0.1, 0.05, you know, those values are gonna be a lot more realistic. And I wanted it to be at something that is noticeable, like a noticeable speed. It's a bit fast, so I mean, a more realistic value would probably be like 0.01. So it's still moving, but it's kind of hard to notice. I like 0.05 because it looks tasty. Let's see what I'm doing here. So, oh man, this is some old stuff. So I'm adding, okay.
While Jack is figuring this out, guys, keep in mind that normally we don't have people look at old work and try to figure out how it works in real time. But because this is such a popular material and you guys all love it, I think we just had to do it.
Yeah, I
Let
figure
me tell
we'll
you.
probably do something a little bit more official and in-depth in the future. Let me just point that
Oh,
out.
yeah. I was gonna say that like I've tried to deconstruct materials that I've made in real time, and it is very hard to sound like you know what you're talking about when you made something 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. All right, so all of this stuff is affecting the UVs, and I'm kind of skip over that because that's just a lot of math that's happening. You can always copy it down or what have you. And that's plugging directly into my sky texture, which is, yes, it's an HDRI. So, yeah. So I took an HDRI and then I'm running that through a power. So here's stuff that I can actually talk a little bit more about. The power is actually to adjust some of the contrast, because what I noticed with this is depending on the exposure of your scene, you're gonna have to crank up the intensity of these values. And when you crank up the intensity a lot, what happens is it gets really washed out. So the power is there to kind of make it look a little bit less like this, and it brings back a lot of that nice rich color that I wanted. I also have controls for, yeah, so I plugged that into the Derive HDR from LDR. I think I did that because just having a straight HDR didn't work. So I decided to derive an HDR from an LDR, and that gave me some additional controls to get it looking a little bit better. For example, you have the HDR intensity, which will just control how bright it is. You can also tint the different values. You can actually tint them differently too. So if you have, like, these are the two layers that are kind of moving forward, and then it brings in the second layer and it moves that forward and switches back to the original layer, moves forward. You can actually change those tints independently from one another. So for whatever reason, if you wanted to do something weird like that, you could do something like that.
So,
Um,
for those of you guys watching right now, Kaja-san has a really, really good comment that I wanted to share. And that's why we use comments on nodes, because that way we can remember what they do later on.
yes, that is exactly why we use comments on nodes, and I should get in the habit of doing that because this is not the first time that I've been confused by an old material that I made. Um,
Hey, you can throw me under the bus for this one. I recommended that you go in depth on it.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. It's nice that I can go over the material, and sure, I can't explain some of the stuff, but hey, you guys can see it and replicate it and mess around with it yourselves. So no harm, no foul.
Yeah, all we need is a time machine to go back to when you first wrote it, and you'd remember everything clearly.
Yeah, it's easy as that.
Trust me, I know the pain. Like, I've actually had a couple of streams recently where I was trying to talk about how I set up materials, and I'm like, oh god, I'm trying to bluff my way through this, and I can barely remember. Oh no. But it's really not that hard. It's just when you guys make something and you have to talk about it years later, it can be kind of tough to remember the same mind frame you were in at that point in time to try to actually understand what it was you were doing. I'm a firm believer that we're not the same people we were yesterday or even a year before. So,
Mhm.
like, trying to remember what it is that you did at that point in time is kind of tough, even for the best people with memory.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Originally I was making this for the marketplace, and then I just could never really get some of the kinks worked out, and it was just too. It was a bit too buggy for me to make an official release, and then so I just started using this in a lot of different scenes where I only had one shot, and I wanted some nice background animations. And as well as you can see here, also the last thing I was going to mention is I do have a saturation input as well on the final output. So if I can just adjust that value to be something that looks good, because once you start messing around with the power, um, you're going to get a lot of like burnt colors as you go up, or if you go down, you're going to get a lot of like really washed out colors. So having a final kind of saturation input really helped to make sure that I had controls that allowed it to look exactly the way I wanted it to look, basically. So that's pretty much the entire material. Yeah, it's actually really cheap too. If you look down here, our shader instructions are pretty damn low. And if you also look at the shading model, it's under unlit and two-sided. So this is going to be a pretty cheap material overall, and also it's very viable for games. Like I said, this was largely based on a talk. I'm trying to remember his name, but I can't. It was a talk about The Last of Us, how they approach doing their skyboxes. And so this is a pretty similar result. And that was designed for obviously last gen hardware, so PS3 hardware. So this is super cheap. And with some more tweaks, some more development, you're going to get something that can look really good without having hardly any performance impact.
Oh yeah. So I think you did a fantastic job being, thrown into the wolves there to talk about a material that you hadn't used in a very long time.
Thank you.
But since we've pretty much covered everything, I'm loath to end the stream early. I think we should do the full hour. And I think we
Mm-hmm.
should have a 15-minute comment session. And I'm going to start that off with a comment from Baba Eva. And they would like to know, do you need a degree to be a game artist or an environment artist? And I will say, as somebody who holds a bachelor's of fine arts from the Art Institute of Tampa, I would recommend the college experience, but only because it's something that helps enlighten you to perspectives and ideas that maybe you weren't going to be experienced with before. I'm glad that I took it. I'm glad that I went through it. I'm not so glad that I have a ton of debt, but I am happy that it opened up the doors for me that I needed to have open to be where I am now. I met a lot of great people in college. I met a lot of great teachers. I have some of my colleagues now I've even gone to school with. So it's a once in a lifetime experience that I think everybody should have, but perhaps you might want to consider going to community college or something. Some employers will require that you have a degree, some won't. Sometimes all your work can be shown through your portfolio. Sometimes you need the portfolio and the degree. What do you think, Jack?
Yeah, no, it's a complicated question because there's a lot of things to weigh, right? So I would say to start off, I don't have a college degree. I went to college for I went to a local community college for a couple of years, and I was spinning my tires, not really getting much of anything done there. And I decided to quit and learn 3D full time. And bless my father, he supported me wholeheartedly, and that was an amazing experience being able to learn 3D, learn art, and do that on my own. At the same time, school offers a lot of benefits that I missed out on. For example, as Jonathan mentioned, there's a lot of networking opportunities at schools. You go to, any sort of game school around here. For example, the Seattle area, you go around here like DigiPen or something like that, and you're going to have a lot of contacts immediately with teachers who've worked in the game industry, other students who will be working in the game industry. That's pretty invaluable. This industry is built on networking and knowing people, and that shouldn't be undervalued because it is very important. Another thing to consider is I still believe game schools are not up to snuff. I don't think they're up to at least my standards. Um, I don't think they're good enough yet. At the same time, I strongly believe that anyone looking into getting into games or film for art, it would really benefit you to get an art degree. Like if you go to any sort of other prestigious school to get an art degree, that is going to really help you in the long run in any sort of entertainment medium where you're doing art. And that's something that actually took me the longest to learn because initially, when I first started learning 3D, I got all the programs down. I was making, sculpts in ZBrush, and I was using 3ds Max and doing all these different things, but I didn't have a refined artistic eye. So everything I was making looked terrible, and I had no idea why. And I would post on Polycount and other places, and I would either get no response, or they'd be like, or someone would be like, "Oh, this does not look good at all, man. Like, just redo the whole thing." So, early in my career, I actually took some time off from freelancing and spent like 3 months looking at Gumroad tutorials, just focused completely on art and how to make good art. And a lot of that was from like people who were working at Naughty Dog as concept artists, and just other instructors who were making traditional like oil paintings, stuff like that. And once I came back from that, suddenly I was almost good. And from there, I could actually practice and evolve my work. So it's a really complicated question. If you're a very self driven, self motivated individual, then maybe going at it on your own is the best option. However, I will say post for feedback all the time. Every day that you're doing something, post something on Polycount. Go to our Facebook group, Quixel, our Quixel Facebook group. Go there, post, you'll get feedback, and you'll slowly start improving. If you're not super self-motivated, I would say as a really nice second choice, maybe consider going to an art school or consider going to a game school. It depends on what you need in your life. For example, if you're really good at networking, if you really want to rely on your networking skills to get you into the game industry while you improve on your art, maybe going to a game school is the best idea. But if you already have your networking down, maybe going to an art school would be better, because if that's really your weakness, maybe that's what you should be improving. Hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully
And
that's a good answer.
yeah, definitely. I think you went above and beyond significantly. That's really good. To echo on a point that you made earlier, for those of you guys who are listening to make it into the industry, it's not always about skill. And that's not to knock anybody who has it or perhaps does not. Anybody can succeed in anything you really want to do. Ultimately, in a lot of ways, what it comes down to is, and it's something I've learned over the years, it's not always what you know, but also who you know. Um, if you have the right connections, you can pretty much go anywhere you want. And you can pick up skills as you work. I'm a very strong proponent of the idea that you never stop learning. So even if you get promoted into a position where you might have a hard time, for those of you guys who have never heard of this concept, it's called the Peter Principle, where you're promoted to your level of incompetence. You can always work through that. It's not hard to do. It is hard. It just takes effort and mental training to get to a point where you feel comfortable with the work. And it can be 3D art, it can be managing, it can be whatever that you're currently doing that you've been promoted to or moved into. But ultimately, sometimes getting that first step in requires knowing people who can actually vouch for you and help you get up. I personally wouldn't be where I am without friends to help me get to where I'm at. And that's why I try to help everybody who I can help, because I know what it's like to need somebody's assistance but never be able to have it. So sometimes it's not about what you know, because what you know can be what other people know as well. But sometimes it's also about who you know and who can open those doors for you. So that's something to take away from this too. Let's see what else we have in terms of chat. Everybody's been talking about the education stuff, which is great because I'm glad it's such an important topic to everyone. But let's see. I'm trying to scroll back up through chat to see if I didn't miss anything. Oh, here we go. Daredevil wants to know, how about making dynamic footsteps on the snow? Can we achieve this using decals?
There's a few different ways that we can actually achieve that, and yeah, decals is one way. That's not a bad way of doing it. What you can actually do is, I believe there's a way to do like a line trace from characters' feet, and then it'll place it right below your feet, right? So it looks pretty good. I also like to use meshes in a similar way, where you can actually place small meshes, kind of like this, like that we made in Maya, where it will do a similar thing, place decals, place meshes. It depends on whatever situation you're in. Like if you're in really deep snow, maybe placing a mesh is a better idea, and so you get like that depth when you look at low angles. But if, like, say you're on a surface, like if you're coming in from a rainstorm into a house or something and you just want some wet footsteps, decals make a lot more sense, right? Because you don't want like a some sort of thick mesh for something that really shouldn't be having any depth, really. So you could do that with meshes. You could do that with with decals. Alternatively, there's the other option of doing it through the shader. This is something I'm not super familiar with, but we're seeing it all the time in games these days. Like, what was it? Rise of the Tomb Raider, Uncharted 2, pretty much all the big budget modern games that have you like trekking through snow up to your knees, and then, all that stuff is peeled away. That's sort of a like a multi-tiered process. You got a lot of things going on for something like that. You have the deformation in the terrain, right? But you also have like little particles that are happening as well. Those are being spawned to occlude some of those artifacts. But it's also because, when you kick some snow, that's gonna dust up a little bit. And so it's important to layer those effects in a way that just sells what you're trying to communicate, basically.
Definitely. Let's see. I think we're kind of running close to the last minute or so of our stream. So wanted to go ahead and say thanks again, guys, for tuning in. It's always a pleasure to be here, and quite an honor, in fact, to be able to help with everything people are trying to learn from these streams. For those of you guys who may not have heard, I'm sure there's not many of you these days, but we did join forces with Epic Games, which means that everything you've seen demonstrated today in terms of materials and textures, aside from the Skybox, is now available for free on Quixel.com for Unreal Engine user agreement subscribers. So that means everybody, pretty much everybody, can work with Unreal and Megascans for free, which is just an unprecedented level of technological advancement and artist freedom that I honestly wish we had when I first started working with games back in 2001, 2002, back when I still had to paint everything in Photoshop by hand. So, yeah, it's again a great pleasure to have you guys on board. Please, at any point, come to our Facebook group. As Jack mentioned, it is located at facebook.com/groups/Quixel Tools Group. The art community is there for you 24/7. Please make sure that you swing by, show off your work you're making. We'd love to hear from you. And thanks again to Joseph for handling technical questions in chat. The man is a technical, brilliant genius, and we love having him on board with us. And thanks again to you, Jack, for spending the time to show off this just gorgeous draw-dropping scene. And it's like, man, I mean, that Skybox is just on another level, dude.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having
So,
me.
yeah, anytime, my friend. So with that being said, guys, it's a pleasure to have you on board, and we will see you again potentially next week. Have a good one.